Hi everyone, this is Emma from Capacity and you're listening to the Fundamentally Different podcast. On today's show, I'm joined by two great guests who are making a big impact on public services in the Liverpool City region, and we're going to be talking about focus and impact in public sector innovation. So we're joined by Tracy Fishwick. Tracy is the Managing Director of Transform Lives, a social enterprise doing exactly that, changing the lives of people across the North West. Tracy moved into social enterprise leadership from local government. Her 25 years of dedication to creating change was recognised in 2020 with an OBE for services to unemployed people. Alongside Tracy, we're joined by Kirsty Mclean. Kirsty is the Exec Director for Policy, Strategy and Government Relations to Liverpool City Region Combined Authority. Kirsty is responsible for developing the City region's overall strategy and policy priorities and engaging government to influence national policy and secure opportunities for the City region. Before starting that, Kirsty was Area Director for the North West in the Cities and Local Growth Unit and responsible for delivering the government's Northern Powerhouse agenda. Kirsty was also Private Secretary to two successive Education Secretaries, Charles Clarke and Ruth Kelly. So, thank you, ladies. Thanks for joining us today. Today's podcast will be aired later in the year, but for the listeners' benefit, we're at the start of June. It's actually a sunny day, and the general election has just been announced. So we can see that whoever forms the next government, there is a real opportunity for a new agenda to put down roots and really grow. Your careers illustrated have been knee-deep in public services across both of your positions and across your career. And today we want to get into some really meaty discussion about how we create focus for change and how we achieve impact in that big phrase of public sector innovation. So to kick us off, when people talk about public sector innovation, Tracy, what does that mean for you?
I guess the obvious answer is to say that it's about, it's innovation is about generating new ideas, doing things differently, implementing some change to create a difference in society. When we talk about public sector, we're talking about society.
Yeah.
And that can be a new improved service or process. It might be that a change in a process can create a lot of difference in terms of people's lives. But I think for me, public sector innovation always has to come back to impact and about asking us to elevate our thinking beyond where we are now and to put people at the forefront of our decision making around that innovation. And so if we're not thinking about the impact on people's lives, I would wonder why we're doing the innovation in the first place. I think sometimes it's been hijacked in the last few years, the innovation or transformation. When you see that written in public service speak, often it's saving money. That's what those
the main
teams
driver.
Are actually driving at. They're driving at public service transformation is actually doing more with less. And whilst that's also valid, because money is always precious, sometimes it does miss the point. Yeah. And the point is people. And so that's what it really means to me. It's about, even if your job is thinking about roads and trains and buildings, well, why do we need change or better infrastructure around those? It always comes back to because people use them.
Yeah.
And if we think about it from how people live, what people need, what's missing in their lives, what makes their lives better, then that's what it really means for me. How do you start from that and then work backwards? Okay. And I think sometimes we lose our way in that it's about for the sake of it rather than what we're really trying to change.
Okay, so sometimes it's potentially a phrase that's been a little overused and has become a bit hazy around what it might mean.
It's like a little gimmick word, isn't it?
Yeah. Tracy, to summarise what Tracy was talking about, it's a phrase that's maybe been overused, stretched to cover agendas around efficiency and change. So we've got to keep ourselves kind of anchored to what is the change that we're trying to facilitate for people, not to try and cut out the enablers of cash. So I don't know, Kirsty, how does it when we ask that question, what does public sector innovation mean? How does that land with you?
In some ways, I think very similar. So for me, it's also about doing things differently. And it's starting from what are you trying to change about people's outcomes? And so how are you trying to use public services differently to achieve that? I think there's a saying, if you do the same things, you're going to get the same outcomes. And I think that is seen repeatedly in public services, that we do the same things and we try and improve them, but we're not really changing anything.
Okay.
So for me, public service innovation is about how do you look at everything with a critical eye and think, what could we change in this to make it better, to improve outcomes for people, and really keeping that focus. I don't think that means you always have to start from scratch, though. And I think quite often when people think about innovation in this space, they think about having to do something completely different. Yeah. But actually, there's a lot of really good practice and outcomes there. You need to look at what can you build on and what can you learn from. It doesn't mean you've got to start completely from scratch. But that focus for me on doing something different, being really clear about the outcomes you're trying to achieve, and then being reactive to new opportunities. So constantly looking for when's the point at which you've got a window to make a change and how could you do that, and then build from there and scale up from there as well.
Yeah, great. Okay. So it doesn't need to be a big sexy transformation program. We're all living in public services all the time, spotting the things that are working or not working. And it's thinking about, okay, what's the end game here that we're trying to achieve and how can I get there better, quicker, safer, whatever the word might be. That's certainly what we've heard from a lot of public sector leaders recently when we've been doing our work through fundamentals. And when we talk to people around, okay, what really enables people to do that? Because making changes like that, like, it requires constant energy, doesn't it? Looking and spotting those opportunities and then being able to act on those opportunities on top of the day job. People shared phrases with us like, to really get to innovation, you need urgent optimism and you need permission to fail. Your boss needs to have your back, that if you break a few rules, it's going to be all right. Or actually, I'm going to champion that. So I just wonder how those phrases kind of resonate with you. Have you seen those conditions in your career? And what do you think really helps create that urgent optimism and permission to fail? So Kirsty, I'll come to you first.
For me, it's about involving people and involving them early and being really clear about what you're trying to jointly design, the outcomes you're trying to achieve, getting senior buy-in, and again, at that early stage, to what are the outcomes, what are the time frame that you're looking at. I think quite often you put an unrealistic time frame on things, the pressure's there. And then people don't feel as though they've got that optimism that something can be achieved within that. Everybody goes back to their kind of safe zone, if you like.
Yeah.
So I think it is about how can you create the conditions where people feel supported, they're able to come up with new ideas. You have got that senior buy-in, but you're also then allowing people to make decisions for themselves, allowing communities to get involved, to shape the work that's being done. And I think a lot of the work that we've been trying to support through the CA is to engage communities and think differently about how you can work with people. So not just doing things to people, but actually how can you create those right conditions so that communities can get involved, as well as professional services, and looking at how you can provide the right conditions that everyone can come together. But for me, it has to be about involving people at a really early stage and getting buy-in to what you're trying to do, and then being flexible as you go along so that people are designing things themselves and the people who are going to be implementing it are designing what that's going to look like. So again, they feel as though they've got a really good chance of success and that optimism can come through really strongly.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess taking your role at the CA, there's a lot of stakeholders, right? So you talk about involving people. If you saw an opportunity this afternoon and you thought, this has got legs, who are the people that you've got to engage? And not names, but, you know, what types of people have you got to get on the bus for? And I'm thinking, you know, for people that are listening who are maybe a provider in the region, where are those levers?
It depends so much on the opportunity, because I think that's where you've got to get to the people who are going to help you with that specific chance. You've got to be ready for any opportunity that comes along. But generally, I think it's about community-led engagement, working with individuals, working with the relevant services, but also who are the providers that are already in that space? Who is it that's influential? I think a lot about the leadership. So what are you going to need, especially if it's about a local programme? Who are you going to need involved in that local level that is going to bring people along with them? Who's got the right networks to get involved? But also, obviously, from a combined authority point of view, we need to make sure that we're engaging the mayor, that we're working with our combined authority, we're working with all the leaders, the local authorities. So, we have a really broad range of stakeholders to ensure that we're doing things for the benefit of the people that are within that city region. But it can be incredibly broad, whether you're talking about colleges or universities, if you're looking at a skills agenda, the business that we work with, depending on where you're looking for employment support. We work really closely with government and government agencies. So the range of stakeholders could be absolutely huge. But I think you've got to try and tailor that according to what the opportunity is. If we tried to engage absolutely everybody for every opportunity, you wouldn't be able to make that progress. So thinking about who are the really key people to involve at each project, at each stage, for us is something that has to be a really live conversation. Otherwise, you're trying to reach too many people at once and you will lose people along the way.
Sure. So really hearing there the importance of relationships and knowing the connections between the assets, the people, the strengths that are already there, and connecting them and bringing them with you.
Yeah. And developing those relationships early. And when you don't know there's an opportunity there. So when it comes along, you've already got that in place. You know where people are going to be coming from. You know what their priorities are, and you can work with them. If you're trying to establish a relationship when you already know about the opportunity, sometimes that can be too late.
Yeah. Okay, Tracy, urgent optimism and permission to fail. What does that make you think about?
It sort of hits a little bit of a nerve for me right now, where I have a project that has been approved nationally nearly a year ago by government departments, and we haven't got the green light yet.
Okay.
So that's an example of, where there's been actually a really open process to put forward an idea on quite a significant scale. This isn't just us. This is part of a sort of consortium, if you like, to get approved. And for different reasons that we can understand when you break them down, but actually government departments have got to do this first, then this, and then get that legal change for this part of the project, and so on and so forth. And so still we are here with the urgent optimism.
It's waning a little bit.
I suspect that we don't have very much permission to fail, even though we start so late.
Yeah.
And that's like the reality of being in, a social enterprise, or if you're working in any part of the voluntary sector, you haven't got that power. You don't have those levers. You're waiting, relying on others. And maybe that's an extreme example, and it's almost like the worst that I've experienced in terms of a delay. And it's a shame, because the opportunity is literally all about public sector innovation and doing things differently and trialling something and experimenting. So anyway, fingers crossed, we're nearly there. I think I remember working in local government. Well, I worked in local government for 20 years. I've worked now currently running a social enterprise or operating in different ways for about 15 years. And one of my early kind of go-to little sayings was, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission, often in local government. But it's always only if you've got some support around you, in terms of people have got your back because they believe that you are doing things for the right reasons. I feel like that maybe has changed a lot over the last 10 or so years, where I think there's been so much more pressure on budgets. There's been so much more, jobs have gone, capacity has gone within the public sector. And so risk-taking, or even the time to think, people haven't got that. They've literally got 3 jobs now where they had 1 job before. And I suppose that makes me think, well, if we really are going to try and operate differently, in answer to the first question as well, why can that not be opened up more? Why can those partnerships not flourish more, where you've got providers or social enterprises or part of the infrastructure that's more like the social infrastructure of a city like Liverpool, being able to take more of a lead with local government, with combined authorities, etc., to mobilise. I think that we've got agility, less bureaucracy. And I think Kirsty's point about, well, how do you engage with everybody? That's literally impossible.
Yeah.
And so it is about those kind of incremental changes I think we can make around relationships and trust and understanding who can do what best.
Yeah.
I think the funding beauty pageant that we seem to have got stuck in more also means that there's almost no permission to fail when you're reliant on a grant for something. It's down to like how many cups of tea I've got to show on a receipt, what we've spent on UK SPF, for example, currently. And I know that a lot of people are very frustrated by that. So where opportunities do arise, sometimes they get kind of
strangled by the paperwork.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tracy. The example that you shared, whilst not everywhere, it's not unique either, is it?
No.
And Kirsty, I wonder if we could draw on some of your experience from working in the machine in government as to what contributes to that. And then I wonder if we could both come back in and just think, okay, in a world where we were trying to strip that out and build more trust and build more relationships and say, hey, look, we're in this as a partnership. How do we make it work? We recognise there's hoops, we've all got to jump through them, but can you see that this outcome over here that actually we were mega aligned to at the start, we've stopped because we've not got through the hoops. So yeah, I guess first to Kirsty, from being in a government position, what is it that contributes to those kind of year-long delays? That's, no one was setting out the start of that year to delay it a year, but all of the things layer on top of each other, and Tracy's still waiting 12 months down the line.
I have a lot of sympathy because actually from the combined authority at the moment, we find ourselves in the same bidding process of repeatedly putting a lot of time and resource into bidding for funding. So just on that point, I completely recognise what you've described. And we find ourselves in exactly the same situation with government of putting bids in for what it feels like increasingly small amounts of money with an increasingly large amount of bureaucracy attached to it and reporting. So really recognise that. I think from my experience within government, it is bureaucratic. It's a big machine. And especially recently, you're seeing a lot of changes within government. So whether that's changes of Prime Minister, changes of Minister, changes of personnel, that then requires them to have another look at things, and that delays. But I think there's a growing bid-based culture at the moment that's probably become even more prevalent since I left. And that takes away from that trusted partnership approach that I think we need. And I think one of the differences that we're trying to do in the way that we work in the combined authority is yes, of course, you've got to have accountability for money and spend, but thinking how can we work more in partnership, developing those relationships, developing that trust. I think where you see central government at the moment having a much tighter hold on the purse strings and putting increasing reporting arrangements and sign-off arrangements in, it really does constrain what people are able to do. And by the time you actually get the funding, the timescale that you've got to then deliver is so tight. And that's the same for us as it is for you. So it is a big machine. It takes a long time to turn things around. It's never anyone's intention. It's often very frustrating for those that are working within government as well, that they're frustrated themselves by the timescales. But I think we've just seen an increasing amount of that in recent years.
Yeah.
So it does feel as though that's certainly an area where if we can do anything to challenge that, we're certainly looking from, again, combined authority point of view, how can we make a much stronger case to government for moving away from that as a way of working so that we can work differently and we can work differently with other organisations as well, because that would make a massive difference to what you're able to achieve.
Yeah. And that, that's a reality as well, isn't it? The bidding and how much time, energy, passion goes into that. You pour your heart into it. Coming back to the phrase around urgent optimism, permission to fail, and in a world where those conditions are thriving, people are happy, we achieve great work. Can you think of a time where a piece of work has had those conditions, and what do you think was really driving it?
I need to go back a little bit. I mean, my work is around employment and skills, and around sort of 2009-10, there was the Future Jobs Fund initiative for youth unemployment, and I look back at that longingly sometimes, thinking it was an urgent situation. The economy, we had an economic crisis nationally or globally. Youth unemployment is always the thing that spikes the quickest in the labour market in those situations. A programme got off the ground, I think, nationally by government within about 100 days.
Wow.
I know. What has happened since to stop that kind of happening? Because fast forward 10 or 12 years, I worked on Kickstart, and it was a different experience, and it took a long time to mobilise and get off the ground with and I think the key difference was, and I'm sure there's other examples in other areas of government, not just employment. Future Jobs Fund was kind of commissioned in one go, lots of trust with local authorities, and big partnerships like charities. I ran the Greater Manchester one, and it was 52 million. Like, there you go. Obviously, it wasn't just landed in a bank account all in one go, but it was done strategically with lots of players involved. Whereas roll forward to Kickstart, whilst we had some really good outcomes for the young people we worked with, we had to apply for every job separately each time. And it took months and months and months and months. Yeah. And that's the difference is about central control.
Yeah,
I think command and control versus the same kind of concept, very, very similar.
Yeah, but just
partnerships leveraged in a different way. And I think there's a big lesson there.
Yeah,
and the impact was different. And I think Future Jobs Fund was seen as a success and more at scale than what we had more recently. And I think that makes me think about what Kirsty was saying about you have the same problem in terms of persuading government to sort of devolve money in a way. And I think the more that we can get to a place where that's more the norm, we would be able to, I think, mobilise things that really matter in our area better and quicker.
So given the autonomy and the permission is the resource, right? Yeah. So all of these challenges that we're working through, if we knew the how that would fix it, we'd all be doing it, right? So a lot of it is iterative. We're figuring it out. We're listening to people. But if you've not got that runway of the 52 million, you're strangled in the process and the transaction that you end up delivering with people. Kirsty, you were starting to kind of vigorously nod when Tracy was talking about that. I don't know if you want to add to it.
I was partly nodding because I was involved in the Future Jobs Fund.
Okay.
But when I was working in the civil service, so I'm really glad that it was well received. And the intention was very much to identify a problem, to give money to the right people to solve it, but to an extent to back off and to allow the delivery and to allow the long-term nature of that to get going. So yes, furious nodding. Mm-hmm. But I also, I agree about you need that runway as you described it. You need to be able to have some certainty into the future to be able to do that planning and to put things in place. And I think that's a really critical element for us. One of the areas that we've been working on is the Cradle to Career project. And I think that for us is a really good and different kind of scale of example of where you can take something and try it in a place and then use that as an opportunity to build out from there. So it came from some early discussions with Wirral Council and Steve Morgan Foundation. And the role that the Combined Authority has been able to play is to look at how that's working. It's very much about doing something different to get ahead of problems, very much around a prevention agenda, working really closely at a very, very hyper-local level with communities and individuals, and working very much with them. Again, this working with people about relationships, not about doing things to people. But by allowing that to remain small at scale, to be really focused, but then thinking, how could you take a similar approach in other areas that takes that learning, is very clear about the impact that you're expecting to see. The evidence and the data is there to support that. Rolling that out, but not out in a way that you have to have an identical model everywhere. Mm-hmm. So it's taking the learning from that and then thinking, how can you use that optimism to say, look, we've seen some real benefits. What would a different area want to focus on? What's the right approach and model? But you might want to pick something different as a different part of the city region that you want to focus that project on. So you're trying to create that evidence, that data, that support around a model, and then think about how you can roll that out and do that differently, but without it having to be a one-size-fits-all, right, you've now all got to work in this way because it worked in one particular place. So again, I think that if you're looking at what creates that optimism, doing something which is small scale, you allow it time to have an impact, and then you learn from it, but you don't expect it to have exactly the same replicable effect everywhere. You allow some flexibility in that because you've built up the trust in the model, you've got the evidence, you've got the support, but then you're also starting again with a different community to work out what you'd want to focus on elsewhere.
Great. Okay. So space to be able to figure it out, relationships and, a blend of leadership you talked about across both of those examples, starting small and it not being a copy and paste, but what are the core principles that are working and how might they work in other places and spaces, which leads me nicely onto the next question, which is around, it's dead easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of change. We kind of become numb to the poor health and social care outcomes that are consistently reported to us, both in our day jobs and in the press. So it can be really tricky to know, where do we start here? So to hand that tricky question over to you, Kirsty, from your point of view, where should we start? Where is the real need and how do we know?
So I think we don't use data and evidence enough in working out where we can target interventions and support and transformation. But we also don't bring data together. Everyone's got their own set of information. We don't always bring that together. And in terms of complex problems that we're all trying to deal with and improve people's outcomes in those situations, no one organisation is going to be able to solve that. It's got to be a group of people working together. But that group of organisations, that group of people, each of those is going to have their own information, their own professionals, their own judgment, their own data they can draw on. But it's only a part of the picture. So if you're looking to do things collaboratively, working with people to understand the richness of the picture you can build up if you bring people together and you use that information and data really cleverly and innovatively to think, how can you then get ahead of the problems? How can you get more into the prevention agenda? And then starting to take it a bit at a time. We do know that there's some really complex problems out there. You've got to allow, again, some flexibility about the order in which you're trying to do things and how you're trying to help people. But I do think that if you can do more to look at the really innovative use of data and evidence and information and put that alongside professional judgment, community views, you get a really rich picture. And for me, that's the way you've got to start thinking about complex problems, because you can't do it through any one organisation's lens. Mm-hmm. And if you're trying to get a grip on where do you start, that for me, common sense of where are all the problems going to come from, what's the data telling you about how we could get ahead of that, what's that overall picture look like, and then how can you work with the key people to start trying to make an impact into that.
Mm-hmm. And how does that space in the Liverpool City region feel right now? So you say we're not using it enough. We're not using it enough. But there's a lot of activity, isn't there? So I don't know, maybe you could reflect back, what does that feel like and what do you think slightly better could look like?
So we're just starting to do some work around setting up a new office for public service innovation. Very early days of the thinking, but really looking at how do you bring some of that people, communities, professionals, public services, and the data that they hold together. Mm-hmm. Because if you look at projects that we have been involved in, as you say, there's a lot that's happening. There's some really good experience out there, but often it's only when we put people together that they've been able to share those stories and to understand what's actually happening as part of a whole. We had a kind of a recent engagement with people locally where we were talking about one of the Cradle to Career projects. They were giving examples of people that they are supporting through that project who previously were talking to however many different services, and each time giving the same story about what's happened to them and their situation. And of course, every service then has its own view on that and the problem. It's only when those people come together and they're able to share that information and the data that you start being able to see the full picture that no one organisation actually had. So there are some really good examples of that, but it's probably not something that is easy to do. So thinking about how could we create something which is an easier platform that people can then use. So really early days of the thinking about it, but trying to think how can we use that as a way of supporting people across the city region to do things differently.
Great. And Tracy, I imagine you live with this day in, day out and balancing, I guess, the demands of funder reporting, recording your cups of tea, but also wanting to get your hands on the intelligence that you know is collected somewhere in the region and that you could make much better use of. So, I pose the kind of same question to you. Where is the real need and how do we know?
I suppose, we're a small social enterprise, right? So I'm living in I'm part of the same system, but in a different lens at what my day looks like and what I'm thinking about. And I think, having worked in the public sector anyway as well, it's that thing about having a kind of strategy and a long-term vision for a place, which I think is really, really important, and setting out some of the things you were talking around, the data and the need and really that sort of system change that we're looking for that might enable that around joint working and things like that between health, housing, employment, whatever it is. But on a day-to-day basis, I'm more not getting overwhelmed by thinking we could be helping 100,000 people, 150,000 people. There's hundreds of thousands of people, who are economically inactive, unemployed, in need of help and are lost, emotionally shattered, financially shattered. And I can't think about that. So what I do is I just try to keep my sort of point of concentration on a good place in the future and doing as much as we can as a social enterprise with the means that we've got to keep doing the right things, which is having the right people in our team, the right skill sets, the right set of beliefs, ethics, and all the rest of it, so that we can be the best we can be for the people who we do meet and who we can help. So kind of not thinking about the whole thing, because it's just then disabling on many levels. But what I can think about is getting as good as we can be and being the expert at what we do, so that when we do our work, it creates the transformation. And so it would then be a case of, well, that kind of, 1,000 flowers blooming like that can make an impact and can fit into Kirsty's strategy and approach because we're there. And I think that connection between us could be better as a city and in any place, because, for one, you just literally cannot know every single thing that's going on. You can't know every single project. You can't actually sometimes tell which is good, bad or indifferent.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? So I could get overwhelmed by the intelligence that's out there. I know the picture well enough because that's what I'm doing. I'm going to focus on delivering services that are as brilliant as they can be, and the people will come and the people will benefit. I guess it's kind of just sticking with the data piece. You will have loads of rich intelligence, both numbers and stories, that could really help people like Kirsty that are trying to make the case for further investment into the region. I'm going to assume that you're not feeding that intelligence into Kirsty. How would we strengthen that? And, you know, the hundreds of other organisations doing work like Tracy's doing on both sides, right? Because if I put myself back in a provider space, when I hear that, I feel more work.
Yeah. That was my first, so thanks, Emma.
So
No, but one thing that has struck me over the years, so there's access to data and access to things that, let's say, the combined authority or local authorities have commissioned or they're doing themselves, and they've got access to that because you know it exists. It's like frontmost, centermost on your radar, and that's obvious. But actually, I'm reporting to the lottery, right? Because I've got lottery funding, or another foundation, or another somebody. We've got, you know, multiple ways of, supporting our resource base. So they hold it, actually.
Yeah.
And those things don't seem very connected and joined up. And so at one point, and I don't know the detail and the numbers, but the lottery was actually funding more intervention here around employment than the DWP outside of its benefit costs, you know, because obviously that's massive. But in terms of that softer employment support, and yet I bet that's never captured in terms of the impact and then how that can be exploited here to understand what's really been going on. Because interventions happen in a myriad of ways. So there might be an arts project, but it's got some employment outcomes. There'll be a sporting project that's got, you know, and so these layers of impact are created in lots of ways. And my brain can't work that out, actually, how you collect it. But that data does exist.
Yeah.
But it's not sucked into like a central point. And I don't think you could probably do it in a perfect scientific way, but you could get some insights, I'm sure, from what was learnt.
And, you know, that's a lot of work. I guess if we bring it back to where we started, which was innovation needs to be focused on the outcomes for people. And that's what providers are focused on whilst keeping the money coming through. So prioritising people like reporting to the lottery. So is there enough value in doing that dream for us to do it, Kirsty?
I think it depends how easy you can make it. I mean, you know, because it is work, but if you make it as easy as possible, and if there's a way of drawing that information without requiring a lot of extra work, you know, we live in a very technological world. Yeah. So actually, is there a way of doing this that just makes it as easy as possible for that to be shared? And maybe it isn't a requirement on Tracy and her colleagues. Maybe it's a requirement on the lottery. You know, there might be a different way of looking at this so that you're not trying to put all the requirements onto small organisations who are rightly focused on trying to get the best outcomes for people. So we'd be really keen in those conversations about how do we do this in a way that gets to that information that is so rich and means we can then do things differently and we can get more investment into the city region and we can use that investment in a much cleverer way to really get behind the things that we know are going to make an impact here. Make sure we are getting devolved funding into the city region, that we're using that really effectively. But it's got to be done in a way that lessens as much as we can any of the workload on people that we know are already, I say, very understandably and rightly focused on the outcomes that you need. But it is a very technological world. It can't be beyond, you know, all of us to actually work out a way of doing some of that is about drawing that information in a way that we can then test back with people. Because actually that's the bit where you can get all of that richness of data and it is really valuable. When you put it together, you do see a very different picture. But we need to keep testing that back with people like Tracy to say, so this is what we think. You know, we put all this together. Does that actually look right? When you look at it, does that seem right? Or actually is the data telling us one bit of the picture, but it's not enough, it's still not rich enough? So that insight, the stories that also matters. So for me, data evidence is really critical. It does help you to target and focus. We need to find ways of making it as easy as possible to get at that. But you've got to put that alongside the stories. It's about people, it's about what has an impact, and you can't lose sight of that when you're focused on the data. So if you can bring that together, make it as easy as possible, but then find ways to involve, people like Tracy in those conversations. So what does that mean we should do differently? Where does that innovation come from? And is it massive scale transformation, or is it about building particular small projects and allowing those to flourish? And that answer will be different depending on the problem that you're trying to solve. But that, again, allowing that innovation to look different. You combine the data, you combine the stories, you combine the insights. That's for me where you've got a really good picture about the city region that you then can start to use that investment differently.
Yeah. And, Tracy, putting you in and in your peers' provider shoes, what value does that have for you? A world where we've got that collective grab of data and intelligence?
I think that, nowadays we spend an inordinate amount of time doing what you could just call community engagement work, right? So if we're focusing on economic inactivity, then by definition, people are not looking for work, right? So it's like by stealth that we're meeting people and we're building trust and relationships in the community. My suspicion is that there's layers of that going on, actually, all in the same places.
Yeah.
And it might be that that's the right thing to do, but we kind of don't know whether it's the right thing to do or not. It's the way the funding works, and so everybody runs off with their approach and feeds that back, and there'll be some, outcomes with that. So that kind of, if there was sort of, I don't know what the word is, sort of steering the market, if you like, around and using that data more intelligently around, well, actually, in, Birkenhead, we really need 2 key organisations, but we seem to have 12. I don't have that information. And actually, my main focus is on what I'm doing, but the sort of oversight of that seems to be, it sits in lots of different places. Health might have commissioned it, housing might, the CA might, the government might, and on it goes and on it goes. And quite often some of us are tripping up over each other. And again, that might be the right thing because different people like different sorts of things that will actually engage and will actually work. But it can still feel a little bit like there could be more guidance towards, do you know what, we just want to focus on these few areas, and these are the organisations, and let's just do that. Rather than always trying to do everything and it feeling quite sort of scattered.
Okay.
A little bit.
So something about the role of data and intelligence helping us to be more collectively intentional.
Yeah.
In how we do our work, because the funders drive a lot of it, depending on where we're fishing from. And then you head down, aren't you? You'll do good partnership along the way, but ultimately you're delivering that piece of work. So if we could bring that back a few steps, we'll really get a shared sense of what does need to happen in those places and who's best to lead that
and
work.
And that coordination, where you wonder how much money is actually being invested in areas that no one's really got oversight of, like the true value of that.
Yeah.
And either the waste or the impact of it.
Yeah.
And the value of it.
Yeah.
And where there's gaps, then that's probably more important, like which areas are getting nothing.
Yeah. Kirsty?
We've been looking as well about how you can, again, get into some of the outcomes that are achieved, which sometimes almost are seen as incidental to the original aim of a project. So we've been doing some work with the Civic Data Cooperative, which has been looking at the health outcomes that you get through getting people into work. And in some ways that's obvious, but actually it's not what's being measured. So the programmes that are designed to get people into work are measuring whether somebody's got into work, what it's not picking up is the health benefit that that's having. And if you can start to recognise the health benefit, then can you start to use some of the funding differently? So again, you're getting into more of a prevention agenda. So rather than waiting for problems to materialise and then spending a lot of money through the health budget on trying to resolve those, is there a way of supporting the employment outcomes at a much earlier stage that supports addressing some of the early health outcomes that stop them then turning into something much more serious and much more long-term? So again, you've got programmes which are often measured about quite a narrow set of outcomes, but if you can try and capture information about what they achieve alongside that, we can then use that to inform different decisions, again, get different investment and get ahead of some of those problems, again, try and get more into a prevention agenda rather than waiting until something happens. And only at that point does probably quite expensive kind of mediation come in, but quite a late stage.
Yeah. Okay, so we're in the utopia of the world where we've got that data and intelligence. We're collectively intentional about the work that we do in the region. But then we get stuck in planning and strategy for a long time. And that might be, because there's lots of people that we need to engage, or it might be because there's lots of committees that it needs to get through. But a lot of stakeholders have kind of paraphrased back to us, you just need to do something. We need to do more. So it's been kind of quartered back to us really regularly. And I just wondered, from the piece of work that you've been involved in that have really got off the ground, what was it that really got them off the ground?
People. It sounds silly, doesn't it? But I think it's amazing when you see people like that who have just got on and done things and made things happen. And you can see that as well in volunteers. People who just do things in their community and make things happen. And we sort of overlook the value of that, I think, that that happens. And there's a lot of, we can learn from the sort of skill sets that they have. We tend to over-process, over-plan, overthink, over-strategize. And yet, there's people driving around delivering food. I mean, look at COVID and the emergency there. And I always think, well, we got everyone off the streets. Was that what did you call it before? The urgent
optimism.
We got everyone off the streets because we had to. And now we're back to where we were, I think. I don't know what the data says, but we're certainly not where we were in terms of that. There was another pressing matter, wasn't there, that people could literally die. And so we were urgent about it. And lots of different partners got stuck in the voluntary sector, I think particularly, played a blinder in terms of doing that. That wasn't us, but how do we get more of that, I suppose?
People that are focused on the do.
On the do.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's very small, it's hyper-local. It's people who know where everything is. They've got all that soft intelligence. They know how to mobilise other people around them, and there's a shared passion for their area and their neighbours, isn't there?
Yeah.
I think sometimes we make things too big, and then it's impersonal, and it doesn't quite matter the same.
Sure. Okay. Keep it small. Keep it focused. Find the people focused on the doing. Yeah. Kirsty, any other answers?
I agree with all of that. It's about the people. I think it's about a coalition of the willing as well. Who's going to be the people to get something off the ground?
Yeah.
Who can you work with? And then if you've got people that aren't convinced, we've got an opportunity to do that, and you can show what works. But starting small, starting with people that are engaged, that are interested, that are motivated, all the people that are willing to try something and make a difference. If you start there and achieve something with that, you can build out from that.
Great. Okay. I've got one last question for you, and hopefully it's less meaty than where we've been. But just before wrapping up, what excites you the most about the next 12 to 18 months about working in public services, Tracy?
Well, I'm daring to dream that we'll have a Labour government that will align with the Labour regional, leadership that we've got, and that we might just be able to pull everything together without wanting that to be an overly political. But I think when people are on the same page, actually at different layers of government, I've seen that. I've lived through that, and I saw lots of things that were really positive and impactful. So I'm hoping for that. I suppose that's on a bigger scale. I'm also hoping that I can get this project off the ground next month, where we'll be able to test out something different at a hyper level around providing community-led employment support in a different way, and be able to think about how we go about learning those lessons now quite quickly, because the time is of the essence, and using that to lead into something more exciting in the future.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what I'm hopeful for.
Okay. So some alignment across our systems.
Yes.
Should create the conditions for some stability, a longer time window, but also that you're going to get your hands dirty, and get stuck into doing some of this new
paintbrushes
stuff.
At the ready.
Brilliant. Kirsty, what about you in your role? What's exciting you about the next 12 to 18 months?
So I think it's a really exciting time for the Combined Authority. We've just had a mayoral election. We've had our mayor returned. We've got huge ambitions, particularly around public service innovation agenda. And I think it's a really good time for us to be working with local partners to look at how we can build on some of the really good examples and projects that we've got. And we know there are fantastic things happening in the city region. But if we can harness some of that and then support that and support the development of that, the chance to improve the outcomes for people that live here in some of our most deprived parts of the city region is just enormous. And I think that sense of enthusiasm that people have got for it is just great. So for me, it's back to the coalition, the willing. There's a lot of people that are really behind this, that really want to see change. And it feels like it's the right time for us to start making that difference.
Yeah.
And that's what excites me about. You can work with all those people. I think we're at the right point to do it, and we've got a massive opportunity. But we've also got a lot of people that want to work as part of that.
Sure. Brilliant. Yeah, just kind of echo that, through the work we've been doing around Fundamentally Different, the excitement is palpable. People want to be part of the gang. And, people have said to me, I don't really care what we're talking about, but it's this, I want to be part of this. And I'm not sure what the how is for the next part of it, but I'm going to throw my brain in and help us think about it. So I'll draw us to a close there on that hopeful, optimistic point. That's the end of today's episode of the Fundamentally Different podcast. So it just leaves me to say a big thank you to Kirsty and Tracy for your time in taking part in a brilliant conversation. For anybody listening, if you want to hear more about Capacity, the Combined Authority, or Transform Lives, you can find it all in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe to more Fundamentally Different podcasts.